The Bahamian economy is evolving, and with it, the way we do business. From banking reforms to innovative community development, these changes are transforming the future of our nation. This is Adapting to Change, Banking, Business, and Community Development in the Bahamas. Today, we'll explore how businesses and communities are rising to the challenge and seizing new opportunities in this dynamic landscape. Keep watching. A brand new episode of You and Your Money starts now.
You and Your Money is brought to you by Leno, Focal, and Central Bank of the Bahamas.
Welcome to You and Your Money, everyone. Joining us today to talk about addressing key economic factors, bank fees, energy costs, and local development is the CEO of Fidelity Bank Bahamas, Mr. Gowon Bowe. Gowon Bowe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rhea. It's been a long time.
Gowon, how are the rising bank fees affecting consumers and businesses, and what can be done to ensure these fees remain fair and transparent?
Well, I think we have to first start with the proposition that are they not fair and transparent? And when I say that, is not being defensive. There are two issues that confront the banking industry. The first one, which I think is the most important, is customer service. And the reality is, when we look back at what the banking community was in many countries, but particularly the Bahamas, it was a society, it was a community. You knew your bankers and you had a feeling of family atmosphere when you moved in. Yes, the evolution of technology and the way things are done has changed that, but I think we have to, as banks, take the criticism on the chin that efficiency doesn't mean the removal of customer service. And so that's one aspect that sometimes then gets conflated with the issue of costs of banking. When we get to bank fees, I think what's as important to understand is a bank is not a mythical entity. It is made up of individuals, you and me. It's shareholders, depositors, borrowers, and employees, all individuals. So there's no Wizard of Oz that sits in the middle. And management really is trying to balance the equation with all of these stakeholder groups. So if I said to a customer that my failure to charge appropriate fees could lead to you getting less back in deposit than you deposited, it would be a different response. If I say to shareholders who put their money at risk that I'm not making decisions that give an appropriate return on their capital, I would get the criticisms coming from that stakeholder group. And certainly if I wasn't sustainable in providing employment, then my employees would be concerned and the borrowers would just have no one to actually help to fund their initiatives and goals in life. So when we talk about fees, I think it's important for us to understand a key word that you mentioned, transparency. What are the costs that go into it? And how do these fees, what I'm going to say, compensate for the costs? And to be perfectly honest, it's about educating consumers so they can make consumer choices, meaning that if your institution is not giving you value for money, you should look at another institution very candidly. But in order for us to help that take place, there has to be a level of transparency. And I think that that's not one that should be shied away from any financial institution. And I think that's the starting point with the central bank. And when we talk about reform, it's really about bringing awareness and understanding in the first instance. And then if you have greater clarity and awareness, you can determine whether or not they are indeed fair or unfair.
Now, what role do energy costs, particularly from the Bahamas Power and Light, play in shaping the financial landscape, and how can businesses mitigate their impact?
You know, if we look, the Bahamas is such a blessed country in the reality that we are probably a first world lifestyle, even though we are still designated as third world and developing. But if we look at one of our largest imports, it's oil or fuel. And a large part of that goes towards the energy production and then distribution and transmission. And the reality is that the inefficient production, transmission, and distribution leads to, for lack of a better word, wastage. So if we think about how we could become more efficient in both the production, transmission, and distribution, which brings down the cost to the end consumer, including businesses, then monies that we are currently spending, whether it's running alternate generators, whether it's on the high fuel costs relative to our fuel bills, our electricity bills, etc., those funds could be redeployed into reinvestment in a business, expansion, and growth. If they're being consumed by what is effectively a sunk cost, because you must have the lights on, in certain businesses, you must have the air conditioner or the freezers running. You must have the aspects that energy provides. If we could make that more efficient, then there's an opportunity to expand. So when the question is asked, what could energy reform do for the economy? It's not a cliche to say that it is a game changer. That ultimately, where we are now spending funds on what is not productive output from the energy we consume, and we move that to productive output, I think the sky's the limit, because ultimately, if you think about our major tourism being the major industry, and even those establishments speak to having to have almost a separate investment for energy backup because of the inefficiency and the ineffectiveness. If they could redeploy those funds in even more progressive advancement in our tourism product, we could still grow even further, even in just that basic area.
Well, even with having to consider the efficiency or effectiveness or ineffectiveness, how are the high energy costs influencing the development of family islands and the wider Bahamian economy?
Well, if we think about New Providence, which is ultimately the capital and where the center of commerce, and the costs that are here, when we go to the family islands, which is a little known fact, the reality is energy has to be subsidized in those territories because we don't have the same level of consumer breadth that says how do you distribute the costs across this consumer base. And so when we complain here in New Providence, certainly for the family islands, if they were to be charged the actual cost, it would be completely debilitating. But ultimately, even the costs that they're experiencing with the higher fuel costs, the distribution to get it into those places, and the lack of stability, even worse than New Providence, is really hindering their growth. I believe when we look at the Bahamas, we have to start being more realistic and say there are certain locations where the mass distribution is not appropriate, and how do we encourage the individuals and businesses in those territories to be more in the renewable energy space, and how do we incentivize that through tax concessions and others to say that as opposed to trying to develop a grid in every island that may not have the actual customer base in order to support the level of capital investment, how do we get efficient and stable energy through alternate means into those locations to allow them to not be hamstrung by the inefficiency and then the high costs.
In the vein of empowerment, what strategies can be implemented to promote economic development in the family islands and support local communities during challenging financial times?
You know, the key word is autonomy. I think that we have long spoken about central government. We have long spoken about decentralizing the management of their affairs, but it has only been given lip service for the better part of our period of independence. If we look at the family island communities, it's amazing when we think about our children, when we think about businesses, when you put responsibility on persons, very often you see a very different response from them. They have an appreciation. When you say to kids they have to manage their spending money or they have to manage their allowance, right? When they believe someone else is paying for it, very lackadaisical and carefree. When they have to manage it, very different. And I think that will be the same in our family islands. We often have this argument that says, are we contributing more to Treasury than we're getting out of it? Well, as opposed to having an argument on it, why don't we move it more directly into that space that says, this is what you have to manage in your fiscal affairs in your local environment, and from that perspective, you need to manage your budget. It doesn't mean that central government may not have to subsidize in certain regards, but I think if we give that control and autonomy into those islands, they know best what they experience in those locations. And ultimately, I think we would be surprised at the efficiency that would come out of making them responsible for managing their own budget.
I think it definitely helps with them about getting their buy-in.
Precisely.
How does Grand Bahama in particular being affected by current economic pressures, and what can be done to stimulate their growth and development?
Well, I think we know that the elephant in the room is the acrimonious relationship that exists between government and the Grand Bahama Port Authority, and that has existed for an extended period of time. I think if we're very candid and objective, the reality is the current construct of Freeport is not working for the betterment of Grand Bahama in its entirety. And there are multiple parties that bear responsibility, so it's not casting blame on any one particular party. And I think from that perspective, what we need to focus on is, if we are fighting one another internally, how is it that we take on the world externally? So we need to get the Grand Bahama and Freeport model to one that is consensus, not unanimity, right? Because we're never going to get that. But what we need to have is a situation that says Grand Bahama and Freeport in particular is not a different country. It is a part of the Bahamas, and it has to be part of a wider national development plan. And we can use a free trade zone for multiple purposes, but we have to decide whether this is a actual private city or just a free trade zone. And I think those lines have been blurred. And to be honest, I think there needs to be a day of reckoning that says, is the Hawksbill Creek Agreement still fit for purpose given where we are today? And whilst we keep talking about how long it extends, the truth of the matter is every contract can be broken. It's just a matter of determining the cost of doing so.
Wow, that's definitely a mouthful. Well, Gowon, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, we will look at evolving work models, the 4-day work week, and its impact on banking and business. This is You and Your Money. We'll be right back.
I think we should open a bank account for Bradley.
Why? We already have enough bank accounts.
Well, the boy of age now, he should start learning how to protect his own money.
Protection. At a bank? We can protect our money right in our house.
Mommy, banks have deposit insurance. It'll protect all of your deposits if a bank fails, all the way up to $50,000.
We have deposit insurance?
Yes, by simply opening an account with a bank or credit union that's a member of the Deposit Insurance Corporation. Now, I know what you're thinking. What if the bank or credit union fails, right? But don't worry. Payouts to depositors will be made promptly.
Insurance is important, and your Bahamian dollar deposits are protected by the Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Okay. Let's go open that account.
To learn more, visit our website at www.dic.bs for more information.
𝗪𝗏𝗡 Holdings Limited is proud of its consistent growth and the financial success it continues to bring to many Bahamians who invest in the company. 𝗪𝗏𝗡 is committed to ensuring optimal financial performance for its shareholders. 𝗪𝗏𝗡's leadership remains focused on superior customer service and operational excellence across all sectors. 𝗪𝗏𝗡, fueling growth for people.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. In this segment, we'll be continuing our conversation with the CEO of Fidelity Bank Bahamas, Mr. Gowon Bowe. We'll be discussing evolving work models, the 4-day work week, and its impact on banking and business. Now, Gowon, how could the implementation of a 4-day work week affect productivity and operations across key sectors in the Bahamas?
Well, the first thing is we have to understand what a 4-day work week means in the Bahamas. Because I would say to the average Bahamian, they're saying this is a holiday weekend all year round. And that's not what the intention behind a 4-day work week is. There are multiple models in relation to a 4-day work week. There are some that view, how do I compact 5 days into 4, so potentially work 10 hours a day as opposed to 8, right? There's another theory that says, well, if I actually use the same number of hours over 4 days, but I effectively use them purely for work, right? So if you think about some of the unproductive time that employers face with employees, whether it's being on social media, whether it's the chatter by the water room cooler and the cooler room, etc. So the first thing I think that is important is the change in the work week is intended to increase productivity, not simply give you an additional day off. And that concept is very important to stress. So if I think about it, and I've come from a professional services background where basically I charge by the hour. And we really need to get to that concept when we give output as an employee into any organization. If we see our labor and the value of our labor being done by what do we actually produce in an hour and get paid for it, then the number of days we work becomes irrelevant because we put the necessary number of hours in order to produce the output that enables a business to thrive. I think there's a lot of discussion that still needs to go on because it is important to bring that level of understanding and clarity to the average employee. COVID has demonstrated we can certainly survive by persons not being in the office. The question that remains, and we look even at some of the largest entities in the US that first went to saying everyone work from home, you're now seeing them bringing persons back. The sad part is the trust around what employees are doing at home. Some, they work twice as hard at home because they never turn it off. Others, when they're not under a microscope and being observed, tend to be, let's say, less productive, if I'm being polite.
Less productive. What potential benefits and challenges do you see for businesses and employees if the Bahamas adopts a 4-day work week?
You know, the benefit, if we get it right, is productivity, because when we look at the Bahamian economy, we often, the criticism that we yield ourselves is that do we get the maximum out of it? And very often there's a comparison between our forefathers and their work ethic and the work ethic of the individuals today. And it is glaringly different. You know, I remember when I look at my grandparents and my parents, there was a strong view and principle and moral that said you gave an honest day's work for an honest day pay. We've lost a little bit of that. So if we can bring that back through a more innovative strategy, there's certainly the upside that we can get far more productivity. The challenge is, if we are to be blunt, is really understanding that there are different classes of workers. There are some who have to be seen or are actually physically required to be in locations. And I think we're going to have to bring a level of maturity, if I say what's the greatest challenge, to understand that this doesn't mean holiday. This simply means a different work dynamic. And let's be very candid. This has been a concept that has been deployed in different parts of the world for many, many years and decades now. And so it's just becoming more topical because it's coming more to North America and the Western side.
How might the customer service and the client engagement be impacted by this shift, and particularly in industries that rely on direct interactions, as you've mentioned?
Yeah, I think that, to be honest, as I started when we talked about the bank fee segment earlier, we have to get back to customer service as a country. My grandmother always said to me that service was not servitude. It may have the same first few letters, but very, very different. And unfortunately, we've developed this behavior that if I am delivering service to someone, I am less than them. And the truth of the matter is, even if we look from biblical times and our own Lord, he showed that, you know, in order to be a leader, you must be a servant. And so from that perspective, we have to get the customer service back to where it used to be. I remember the things like Bahamas hosts, which were very instrumental in teaching people not only how to deliver, I'm going to say a high quality product, but how to engage with the customer. And yes, it was focused on tourism, but that's something we need to roll out across all industries. It's the understanding that you don't exist without that customer stakeholder base. And more importantly, like I say, service is not servitude. And if we elevate service, to be honest, you're probably going to be a leader sooner than you'll realize it.
Are there any examples from other countries or industries where the 4-day work week has been successful? And what lessons can the Bahamas learn from them?
You know, we've seen it in some of the Scandinavian countries and certainly parts of Europe where they have adopted this approach. And the reality is they have a high tax system and they have a high social benefit system that is there. So sometimes we try to grab on bespoke instances and not understanding the wider construct. And so I would only say that we have to be cautious not to look at just the one aspect which we want to see, which is less work days and look at the entire system. And that's where I go to the National Development Plan. There's so much that we can do as a country, but we need to understand that there is no ceteris paribus. That is, there is not all other things held equal. There is, every time you change one dynamic, another dynamic shifts. And so we need to be more holistic in our approach. And I think considering the 4-day work week without some wider reforms in our industry, in our national planning, in our national productivity, is going to be fool's errand. And so we have to look at this in the context of saying, how do we look at a national development plan? And one component of it is looking at how we work.
Well, Gowon, we have to take another break. And when we get back, we'll talk about global influences on local stability, the role of U.S. elections, and external factors. This is You and Your Money. We'll be right back.
𝗪𝗧𝗏 Holdings Limited is proud of its consistent growth and the financial success it continues to bring to many Bahamians who invest in the company. 𝗪𝗧𝗏 is committed to ensuring optimal financial performance for its shareholders. 𝗪𝗏's leadership remains focused on superior customer service and operational excellence across all sectors. 𝗪𝗏, fueling growth for people.
I can't believe how big Christopher's gotten. He'll soon be ready for college.
Not at the rate I'm going. I'm praying for an athletic scholarship.
It's never a bad time to start saving. I just started Nicole on a college savings plan. I have options based on her age. It contains a mix of stocks, bonds, however you choose.
Mommy, come push me.
I'm coming.
Girl, how do you know all of this? What's Leno?
I think we should open a bank account for Bradley.
Why? We already have enough bank accounts.
Well, the boy of age now, he should start learning how to protect his own money.
Protection. 𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗛, we can protect our money right in our house.
Mommy, banks have deposit insurance. It'll protect all of your deposits if a bank fails, all the way up to $50,000.
We have deposit insurance?
Yes, by simply opening an account with a bank or credit union that's a member of the 𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗛𝗧𝗏𝗏 Corporation. Now, I know what you're thinking. What if the bank or credit union fails, right? But don't worry. Payouts to depositors will be made promptly.
Insurance is important, and your Bahamian dollar deposits are protected by the 𝗪𝗏𝗧𝗛𝗧𝗏𝗏 Corporation.
Okay, let's go open that account.
To learn more, visit our website at www.dic.bs for more information.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. Mr. Gowon Bowe, CEO of Fidelity Bank Bahamas, is still here with us. In the previous segments, we spoke about addressing key economic factors, bank fees, energy costs, and local development, and evolving work models, the 4-day work week, and its impact on banking and business. In this segment, I want us to talk about global influences on local stability, the role of U.S. elections, and external factors. Gowon, how do the outcomes of the U.S. elections typically impact the Bahamian economy, particularly in terms of trade, tourism, and investment?
You know, if you ask that same question about 30 years ago, there was a significant impact between Democratic governments and Republican governments. And the reality was because they have very different economic philosophies. Republicans certainly more capitalist, but more of a view of free market enterprise. And so tax havens and tax management, et cetera, is more widely endorsed by that particular political party, whereas the Democrats are more socialist and they are more focused on closing the tax net and making sure that they collect the maximum amount of taxes. The reality is, rolled forward now 30 years to today, the change in actual administration in the U.S. has, in my view, less of a significant impact because the world has moved beyond the United States. The reality is now the Bahamas is a part of a global economy that has the OECD, G7 countries, Europe, etc., that before used to feed off of the position of the U.S. My view is that they now see the U.S. environment as so erratic and, you know, some may even say bipolar, that they have largely independently determined their policies for the global economy independent of the U.S. And so the U.S. change in administration, yes, has ripple effects, but not anywhere near as significant as it was before. For the Bahamas in particular, yes, when we look at our major tourism source, it is North America. That is less driven by the actual administration that's in power and more about the strength of their economy. The good news is, with the elections now slated for the later part of this year, money is going to be circulated in the economy because both political parties are going to be pumping money into the economy in terms of trying to get their candidates elected. And so that is going to mean more money in the pockets of the average consumer. That is going to mean their purchasing power goes up. And so certainly for the next 6 months, we're probably going to see what I'm going to call that bubble effect of their elections. The danger is after the honeymoon is over, if you will. So what happens when the election is done, there isn't a presidential candidate, and now it's back to real life, right? So back to reality.
Now, what external global factors beyond U.S. elections should Bahamian businesses be mindful of as they plan for economic stability and growth?
You know, we need to be conscious of everything that's taking place around the world. We talk about the Ukraine war. We talk about the tensions that may be in Israel and Palestine. We see the geopolitical fights between the U.S. and China, U.S. and Russia, etc. And we often believe that we live in a bubble and these things don't impact us. The Ukraine-Russia war, as simple as the cost of commodity items, because people were not aware of how many things that, in terms of our just bread and the inputs that go into some of the daily food outputs that we eat that come from some of these jurisdictions. So Bahamian businesses need to be not just turning on the news to see what nonsense is being said in the U.S. election, but turning on the news to understand what are the dynamics taking place around the globe, and then start to ask the question, well, what does it mean to the global economy? And recognizing the Bahamas as a player in the global economy, does that mean a change in our tourist behavior? Does it mean a change in the cost of our inputs? Does it mean a change in the way some of our allies in the past may support us going forward? And so it's a difficult question to answer in such a short segment, but the reality is we have to stay cognizant so that we are in a state of readiness as opposed to a state of reactive.
And how can the Bahamas position itself to mitigate against any negative effects from global economic shifts while capitalizing on the potential opportunities?
I think we have to put it in the context that we can't change what's taking place outside. We can only control what we do internally. And I go back to the elements of make hay whilst the sun is shining, create the reserves, create the strategic direction that the country will take. And all of that comes back to one very simple element: national development plan. That the reality is, if we understand our social pillar, our economic pillar, our actual built and natural environment and governance, then the answer lies in that national development plan. If we know where we're going, even though there may be headwinds or there may be various winds that knock us off our trajectory for short periods of time, we actually have that straight line GPS to come back to. When we are actually just flying by the seat of the pants, when we get knocked off, we don't even know if we're going backwards because we don't know which direction is up. And so I repeat that the National Development Plan is not a luxury. If we are going to be successful in this global world, it's a necessity. And the longer our political class continues to kick that can down the road, the further behind they are leaving us.
Well, Gowon, thank you for joining me on the show today.
It's always a pleasure.
Here are dollars and cents snapshots from this week's show. Number 1, work model evolution. The 4-day work week presents opportunities and challenges requiring careful evaluation of its impact on productivity. Number 2, energy costs impact. Rising energy costs are a critical factor for businesses and local economies, especially in the Family Islands. Number 3, global influence. External factors like the U.S. elections can have significant ripple effects on the Bahamas' economic stability and growth opportunities. That's it for today's show. Don't forget to follow You and Your Money on Facebook and tune in next week for a brand new episode. I'm Ria Christina. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.